Your grandmother didn't just store coffee in that red-lidded Maxwell House tin. She stored survival. She stored the bone-deep terror of a world that takes more than it gives. It sat on the highest shelf, gathering dust and grease above the refrigerator, a silent monument to the belief that the only way to keep money was to hide it from your own desperate hands. That tin was a ghost. It haunted every meal, every Christmas, and every repair bill that made your mother's hands shake. You were raised to believe that money was a wild animal that had to be caged, never fed, and certainly never set free to grow. Poverty isn't just a lack of funds, it is a psychological inheritance. It is the way your breath hitches when you see a four-figure balance because your brain thinks you've stolen from your own future. For decades, you lived inside the architectural limits of that coffee can. You played by the rules of people who were never meant to win. You respected a ceiling that was built before you were even born, a structural barrier of habit and history. But then you stopped looking at the floor. You started looking at the mechanics of the cage itself. You realized that the red lid wasn't protecting the money from the world. It was protecting the world from you. And once that realization cracks the surface, the ghosts start to starve. Because for the first time in your family's bloodline, someone isn't just surviving, someone is hunting. This is the moment the ceiling finally shatters for good. Poverty is a sensory experience before it is a financial one. It is the specific metallic taste of anxiety that sits at the back of your throat when the mailbox clatters in the early afternoon. It is the way the air in the kitchen changes when your father sits down with a pile of envelopes and a calculator that hasn't seen a new battery in 3 years. You grew up in a house where money was never an asset to be used, but a predator to be avoided. You learned the geography of lack by watching your mother's eyes skip over the premium brands at the grocery store, a practiced subconscious avoidance that she never had to explain. You understood that the world was divided into two groups of people, those who looked at the menu from left to right, and those who looked from right to left, checking the prices before they even knew what they were hungry for. This is the inheritance of fear. It is a quiet, suffocating script written in the language of survival. It teaches you that stability is the highest possible achievement, and that any movement toward more is a dangerous gamble with the little you already have. You were trained to be grateful for the crumbs because you were told the bread was reserved for people with different last names and better zip codes. Every time you wanted something that wasn't a necessity, you felt a surge of guilt, a biological alarm telling you that you were being greedy. That guilt was a defense mechanism designed to keep the family unit intact and safe from disappointment. You didn't realize that your parents weren't just protecting your feelings, they were protecting their own worldview, because if you could have more, then their struggle was a choice rather than a destiny. That is a heavy realization for a child to carry. So you learned to shrink, you learned to keep your head down and your expectations lower. You wore the hand-me-downs, not just on your back, but in your mind. You adopted their limitations as your boundaries. You accepted the idea that people like you don't get ahead. They just get by. The ceiling wasn't made of glass. It was made of the stories told at the dinner table, the sighs after a long shift, and the absolute absence of anyone who had ever done anything different. You were breathing the exhaust of 100 years of barely making it, and you didn't even know the air was supposed to be clear. Your reality was a small room with no windows, and you were taught that looking for a door was an act of betrayal. This psychological architecture is what creates the invisible ceiling. It is the belief that struggle is the only authentic way to live, and that success is a foreign language you were never meant to speak. The breach doesn't happen with a roar. It happens in the quiet, uncomfortable spaces between your reality and your curiosity. It starts when you see someone who has the life you were told was impossible, and you realize they aren't smarter than you. They aren't inherently better or more deserving. They simply have a different set of operating instructions. This realization is a violent act. It feels like a betrayal of your parents, your ancestors, and every person who ever told you to stay in your lane. To even consider that the ceiling is a lie is to suggest that those you love have been living a lie too. That is the hardest part of the awakening. You start to see the contradictions in the logic of lack. You realize that working yourself to the bone for a paycheck that barely covers the rent isn't a badge of honor. It's a structural trap. You begin to consume information that feels like forbidden texts. You spend your nights on the internet, tucked away in the corners of forums and videos, learning a language that your family doesn't speak. Terms like compounding interest, scalable assets, and risk management start to replace the vocabulary of coupons and overtime. This is the moment the script begins to tear. Like you feel a strange sense of vertigo because you're stepping off the edge of the world as you knew it. Your friends and family notice a change in your eyes, a distance that wasn't there before. They see you looking past the walls of the neighborhood, and it scares them. They try to pull you back with jokes, with warnings about people who got too big for their boots, with stories of failures that happened 20 years ago. Um, they call it being realistic, but you finally see it for what it is, a collective defense mechanism against the pain of hoping for more. You realize that their realism is just a coffin they've decorated to look like a home. Breaking through this cognitive barrier is like learning to breathe underwater. Everything you thought was a universal law is actually just a local habit. You start to understand that wealth isn't a result of luck. It's a result of a specific kind of architecture that you can build yourself. The fear doesn't go away, but it changes. It stops being a fear of failure and starts being a fear of staying the same. You would rather drown in the deep ocean of the unknown than stay safe in the shallow puddle of your past. Um, Once you decide to leave the script, the first thing you lose isn't your poverty, it's your community. This is the part they never put in the motivational posters because isolation doesn't sell subscriptions. You enter a phase of life that feels like a long, silent hallway. Your old friends are still in the same bars, talking about the same people, complaining about the same bosses, and suddenly their conversations sound like they are in a foreign language. You don't judge them, but you can no longer join them. There's a specific kind of violence in outgrowing the people who knew you when you were small. Your social circle has a very efficient immune system. When it detects a change in your behavior, when you start staying in on a Friday night to study or building a business that nobody understands, it identifies you as a foreign body. It attacks not with hatred, but with concern. They ask why you've changed. They tell you that you're working too hard. They remind you of the time your cousin lost everything trying something similar. They're trying to pull you back into the safety of the collective struggle. To stay on your path, you have to become a ghost in your own life. You start saying no to the weddings, the birthdays, and the Sunday dinners. You stop explaining yourself because you realize that people only understand from their level of perception. You build a sanctuary out of your isolation. This is the grind that nobody posts about on Instagram. It is not about aesthetic coffee cups and sunrise views. It is about the Tuesday afternoon when you have been working for 16 hours. Your back hurts, your bank account is still empty, and the only person who believes in you is a version of yourself that does not exist yet. You are living in a gap between two identities. You are no longer the person who accepts the ceiling, but you are not yet the person who has broken it. This middle ground is a desert. It is lonely, dusty, and full of moments where you look in the mirror and wonder if you are actually going crazy. You carry a notebook full of ideas that feel like secrets. You are building a private empire in your mind, while your physical reality is still a rented room with a leak in the ceiling. This disconnect creates a psychological pressure that most people cannot handle. They fold under the weight of the silence. They go back to the bar. They go back to the comfort of being understood. But you realize that the price of being extraordinary is being misunderstood for a very long time. The grind is the smell of cold coffee and the blue light of a screen at 4 a.m., while the rest of the world is dreaming. It is the humiliating repetition of tasks that do not seem to lead anywhere. It is the resilience to keep going when the only feedback you get is silence. You turn your loneliness into a laboratory. You realize that your ambition is a fire that needs a lot of oxygen, and the people from your past were unintentionally suffocating it. You are not being cruel by leaving them behind. You are simply following the laws of gravity. You are climbing, and they are standing still. The higher you go, the thinner the air becomes, and the fewer people you will find there. You accept this. You embrace the quiet. You learn that the only way to build a new life is to let the old one burn away completely. The moment you hit the million is not a movie scene. There are no flashing lights, no champagne popping in slow motion, and no swelling orchestral score to validate the years of sweat you poured into the void. It usually happens on a random Wednesday afternoon while you're wearing a t-shirt you have had for 5 years. You're sitting at your desk, the same desk where you failed 100 times, and you refresh the page. The numbers align, 7 figures. You stare at the screen and wait for the world to change shape. You wait for your heart to explode or for the air in the room to turn into gold. But the air stays the same. The clock on the wall continues its indifferent ticking. The neighbor is still mowing their lawn. This is the uncelebrated arrival, a milestone that feels more like a heavy secret than a victory lap. You realize in that silence that the money has arrived, but the version of you that dreamed of it is gone. You are a different animal now, forged by the very isolation you used to fear. You look at your phone, scrolling through your contacts, and you realize there is no one to call who will understand the gravity of what just happened. If you tell your mother, she will think you are bragging or worry that you are involved in something dangerous. If you tell your old friends, the gap between you will turn into a canyon that can never be crossed. So you close the laptop, you walk to the kitchen and pour a glass of water. You're the first person in your bloodline to ever stand on this side of the mountain, and the view is terrifyingly quiet. You realize that wealth is not a noise, it is a silence. It is the removal of the background radiation of survival anxiety, leaving you alone with your own thoughts for the first time in your life. The ceiling is gone, but the sky is vast and cold. You're no longer running from anything, but you have not yet figured out what you are running toward. This is the threshold of the new world. You have succeeded in the eyes of the spreadsheet, but your soul is still catching up to the speed of your bank account. You sit in the stillness, a millionaire in a quiet room, realizing that the finish line was just another starting line in disguise. The geography of your life has changed, but the map of your childhood remains the same. When you go back home for the holidays, the house smells exactly like it did when you were 10. It is a mixture of floor wax, old laundry, and the lingering scent of whatever was on sale at the butcher shop. You step through the door, and for a second, you were that kid again, the one who learned to hide his hunger. But the person standing in the hallway now has a watch on his wrist that costs more than his father made in a year. This is the friction that nobody warns you about. You sit at the kitchen table, the one with the folded napkin under the short leg, and you realize that you are an alien in your own history. You love them with a desperate intensity, but the language you speak now is not taught in this house. When the bill comes at dinner, you reach for it instinctively. You say it is nothing. Your father looks at the floor, and your mother says you didn't have to. There's a micro silence that stretches between the dessert and the car ride home, a silence filled with the things they are too proud to ask and the things you are too afraid to offer. You are losing people who aren't even leaving. Your childhood friends look at you like you are a museum exhibit, something to be studied or envied but never touched. They test you with jokes that have teeth. They wait for you to act like you are better than them so they can finally feel justified in their resentment. When you don't, they don't know what to do with the version of you that remained kind but became powerful. You start to feel the survivor guilt. It is a heavy, cold weight in the center of your chest. You look at your mother's worn hands and you know you could write a check that would change her life forever, but you also know that if you do, you might break the only thing she has left, which is her dignity. Success has turned you into an island. You are safe, you are prosperous, and you are utterly alone in the middle of a vast ocean of history. You realize that you cannot carry everyone across the river. Some people are destined to stay on the other side, and the most loving thing you can do is let them stay there without making them feel small for it. Being the first millionaire in your family history means you are building a cathedral in a land where people only ever knew how to build huts. You are the architect, the mason, and the first resident all at once. There's no blueprint passed down from your father, no attic full of ledgers from a grandfather who understood the mechanics of preservation. You are figuring out how to hold the weight of a legacy while you're still learning how to stand in the light of it. The burden of the architect is not about the numbers themselves, it is about the architecture of the future. You look at your children, or the children you hope to have, and you feel a new kind of fear. You want to give them the security you never had, the soft bed, the quiet house, the education that does not come with a death sentence. But you also know that the fire that made you was fueled by the cold of your childhood. You worry that by removing the friction from their lives, you are removing the hunger that makes a person great. You are trying to build a foundation that is a platform, not a prison. You want them to have the options your mother was never supposed to have, but you also want them to understand the cost of a dollar in their bones. You are moving the finish line of your ancestors and making it the starting line for your descendants. This is an impossible responsibility. You are not just managing assets, you are managing the psychological trajectory of an entire bloodline. You are the point in the family tree where the branch stops bending under the weight of survival and starts reaching for the sun. That transition is violent, it is beautiful, and it is exhausting. You carry the weight of knowing that everything you do now echoes through decades you will never see. You are building the walls of a room where your grandchildren will dream, and you are making sure those walls are wide enough to hold their biggest versions of themselves. You have destroyed the ceiling, and now you must make sure the floor you have built is solid enough to carry the weight of their potential. This is the final stage of the crossing, where the millionaire becomes a patriarch and the money becomes a legacy. The primary lesson of this entire journey is that breaking a generational cycle is a surgical procedure performed on your own soul. You must be willing to lose your current sense of belonging to gain a future sense of freedom. Wealth is not the final destination. It is the natural result of becoming a person who no longer fits inside a small room. In the future, your children and their children will look up and see an open sky, never realizing that you were the one who spent your best years dismantling the roof over their heads. They will inherit a different world because you were brave enough to be the quiet stranger at your own family table. What was the specific sharp moment you realized the script you were handed was a lie? Was it a look on your mother's face or a number on a repair bill you simply could not pay? We want to hear your story of the silent grind and the lonely victories in the comments below, because this path is too heavy to carry without knowing others are walking it too. If this touched a part of your story that you usually keep hidden, please subscribe and turn on the bell. Share this video with the one person who is currently questioning if the isolation is worth the price. You are the architect. Keep building.